In almost every area of life, people encounter things that they observe, but that are not fully understood by science. To me, the challenge isn't noticing them, it's deciding on how seriously to take them. That's really what we're talking about here. That's what we intend to do with this show. So for this episode, I really wanted to start with a foundational question that kind of sits underneath everything we talk about, whether it's UAP, psychology, physics, or the human experience more broadly. So what actually counts as evidence when the data is incomplete? Nick, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Data, we have so much data in the world right now, and it feels like the more data we have, the less we know. How do you compute? How do you turn that data into valuable information? I think that is always a sticking point. And when the data is incomplete, how do you, as like you said, how do you count that as evidence? Is it a blurry footage? Is it a blurry picture? Is it, a witness statement? Is it something in the ground you found? Is it a recording? There are so many different possibilities of evidence. And obviously, depending on the phenomena, depending on the background, depending on what's going on at the time, evidence might appear later, it might appear right now. I suppose the issue that I have is turning any bit of evidence, any bit of data, any bit of anything into valuable information. And I think we're so focused on data collection. It feels like we're just collecting data for the sake of it. And we kind of get lost on the other end of, again, turning it into valuable information, credible information. Like that's what we're seeking is the information. From the information we can create some truths from that. But it's very difficult in today's world to pick apart what is incomplete data and what is complete data, because that could mean two different things to two different researchers, to do different enthusiasts. How do we quantify what complete data is? Because it always feels like even though we have so much data, there's never enough. There's always something more we could be collecting, or there's another layer we could go in. And I feel like we kind of get lost in just the data collection. And I don't think it ever really accounts for anything beyond that. So I think the question really is, how do we create evidence? How do we create information from incomplete evidence? I think it is a more vital question, because data comes and goes. There are petabytes of data all around the world. Probably even more than that now. But I think we need a way to refine it to make it a complete product, a complete data source. We need to get it out the other end of the factory, as a complete model, you could say. And I think that is where we're kind of lacking in a lot of this incomplete data. Is, again, we can have endless streams of data, but if we don't find a way of transferring it into complete information, I think that's kind of where we're going round in circles a lot of the time.
Not all evidence carries the same weight. And I find that to a very large extent, especially in the areas we're talking about, not only is anecdotal experience kind of the heartbeat of unknown studies,
Mm.
it's also the antithesis to many people of what constitutes solid evidence.
Mm.
What do you think that we can do to bring the personal experience, the anecdotal experience, what was observed? How do we get those who really look at raw data and turn that into science to pay attention to that?
I think it's about helping one another. I think as individual researchers and data miners and people who are in the more hardcore trying to process the data, I think there are talents where we need to connect up. We need people who can visualize the data, who can turn the data into understandable language for the common folk. We need people who can turn that data and present it to people. We need people who can turn that data and turn it into a documentary, into a white paper. I think it's not just about, I think there are many phases that it needs to go through to make us understand what is going on. And I feel like, especially in a lot of these unknown phenomena cases, it's such an individualist area a lot of the time. It's either him or them or she or, whatever it is. I think we just need to work together. As simple as it is,
Mhm.
we need to use all of our talents together. And any other industry, whatever you're doing, if you're repairing cars, you'll have someone working on the tires, you'll have someone working on this, you'll have someone working on that. You need more than just one area of expertise. And I think we kind of really need to come together and create a much better pipelines and track for really getting this data out there and turn it into information and turn it into information that is digestible to the average person.
Why do you think some hypotheses feel more compelling than others, even when the evidence is weak? And I'll cite an example recently, in my opinion. The 3I Atlas
Mm,
visit entering the solar system and making its way through, and now it's on its way out. At no point was it in ever going to come close to Earth. But we saw a lot of sensationalism talking about as it nears Earth and arrival and all these other things. And there was a small cadre of people who were leaning very heavy into some circumstantial evidence, some direct evidence,
yeah.
observances that there may be an artificial aspect to 3I Atlas.
Mm,
But the majority of say astronomy and folks in that realm were treating it just as an interstellar object
mm,
akin to a comet that requires more study. So we had a break there between a lot of the people that would involve themselves in the unknown and its study
mm,
and the people that are already seen as the subject matter experts.
mm,
How do we bring those two groups together so the minority who's willing to, you kind of said it's
yeah.
about working together, but there's I hate to overuse the word, there's a stigma
Mm,
that's attached to anecdotal experience.
mm,
So I think that by sharing information, by being more open about it, by making it available,
mm,
that slowly this will matriculate into academia and that we'll
mm,
start to see more people like Avi Loeb willing to play in the gray and to make hypothetical statements or
mm.
conjecture.
Yeah, I think as a species, we always live and in the dream world, what if a spaceship came into our solar system? What if this world changing event occurred?
Mhm.
And with media and with our history and with our experiences, I think influences a lot of our thoughts and opinions when we see something like 3i Atlas enter our space and is an unknown.
Mhm.
It may not be the norm, it may not be exactly what we're used to, but then, we understand so little about our universe.
Mhm.
The logical side of me is it could be many things. It could be this, it could be that, it could be an asteroid, it could be a comet, it could be a meteor, it could be a new thing in space that we've never seen before.
Mhm.
It could be aliens, it could be remnants from an old civilization. We just don't know. And it's I think what should happen, it should be creating hypotheses about without creating endpoints in the sense where you put yourself down a rabbit hole and you believe this is an alien object, this is an extraterrestrial object. I think it's so easy to come to those conclusions. I think it's okay to believe those things for sure.
Mhm.
If you believe it is one of those, and that's fine. But I think you also need to be open minded and really build theories out like the old scientific way. Have a few theories, work towards them, and see which one is the closest. And because as a species, as a whole, we've become very opinionated with social media. We've become very egotistical. People also don't want to get it wrong. So they'll very much likely stick to one idea they've had or one belief they had. But I think we just need to be a bit more open minded. Again, work together, as I said, and really just be okay with being wrong as well.
Mhm.
We're not always like, we always make mistakes as individuals and as teams and as a whole race, as a whole species. And it's okay to be wrong. It's okay, if 3A Atlas is just a comet or you
Mhm.
think it's a comet and it's an alien spacecraft or whatever it is. At the end of the day, the 3A Atlas has its own truth. It knows, well, but, it is what it is in the scientific realm. It still could be many things. Obviously, we don't know exactly what it is, but now we have a bit more data. We can turn that data into a bit more information and conclude that it could be a couple of things that is flying through our point in space now that it's heading away from us. But I think it's just really about keeping an open mind, but also making sure that you kind of follow the scientific method. And I know the scientific method nowadays has evolved into many different areas of doing the scientific method. There's, the more conscious side, there's the more spiritual side, there's a more kind of the nuts and bolts side of things. They're kind of all splitting off into their kind of own dimensions, I suppose. So I suppose it also would be good to kind of connect those as well. Like, the further those go apart, the further it will create a lot of confusion. And the one thing we don't want when we're trying to investigate things is confusion. We want to eliminate as much confusion as possible. And that's why it's important to, if there is incomplete data, to try and be very logical. I know logical can be boring sometimes, but if you're really trying to catch a criminal or discover a new island somewhere or whatever, you do need to have hard facts. And
Mhm.
and if you can never get hard facts, then just keep it a theory. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be, we're not going to solve everything all the time. We're not going to know everything all the time. And some things, unfortunately, will just be left a mystery for our kind of civilizations. I think it's not always a bad thing not knowing.
I feel like it ends up coming down to two missing aspects when it comes to establishing these truths. And I agree with you. There are a lot of things we can never know 100%. We're
Yeah.
never going to see Three Eye Atlas again.
Mm.
Chances of that we're going to ever catch up to it to finish solving the mystery is probably nil. But there's two areas to me that are really lacking. One of those is crosstalk. And while the internet has given us so much, it's given us access to information, to things that most of us may have never encountered in life, maybe in our local library or our magazine subscriptions or in our regular experience. Now the internet has opened up the entire world of experience for many people. But at the same time, that kind of dilutes the stream where we have a hard time determining fact from fiction and record from myth. But at the same time, that crosstalk that I see missing is starting to happen because of this level of communication. People that were stovepiped into, areas of study. For example, a paleontologist might not be as up to date with cultural anthropology and might not be as up to date with physics. But it turns out that now that the internet has given us access to all of these things, we're starting to see individuals who are going to combine disciplines and start that crosstalk. But in the end, the question is, who is the authority that's going to establish that truth? And it seems like as humans and as tribes and groups that we require an authority figure to tell us what the truth is, and then we examine it and see if we agree to an extent. And at this point, it's hard to really point at the authority apparatus, if it were, because I guess what I'm trying to capture here is, people like you and I will read a lot of peer reviewed papers. We're not scientists, but we're interested. We read those things, and that peer review may not reach the masses until a drug is sold, a product is created, etc. And if not, the update to society takes a very long time. In our area of expertise, most people have taken for a fact that something is going on in the realm of unidentified flying objects. But as we've seen evidenced at the hearings in front of Congress in the United States, people are astonished that this is being taken seriously at a certain level. There's still, it's not a fact that the mystery even truly exists to a lot of people. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on crossing those divides there? Teamwork is going to help, sharing is going to help, but then we're left with the ego.
I mean, if you look about how we used to agree on scientific discoveries, it used to be societies. It used to be a group of, unfortunately, old white men, who you had to go up to and prove that this is true. And if they all agreed, it would be accepted into scientific fact. Now, of course, I think that's a very outdated method in the grand scheme of things. But we've become such an individualized culture now where everyone is their own brand, their own content creator, their own ego. I do think it has to go back to that group mentality. It has to go back to a level of a society, of a society of a group of very fantastic, experienced, smart individuals who can go through these with all their different expertise and really kind of grant, yes, this is great. No, this is terrible, maybe. And if it is terrible, then maybe it can go to more of a public debate. Maybe we can get it into more of a citizen science review where anything that doesn't pass the grand stamp of approval from a scientific society, it can go to the public domain and people can look at it, pick it apart, or improve it, and then it maybe can get a second round. I think again, I think most of our problem is the fact that we a lot of the time we just don't work together. It's one person working on this peer review, it's 10 people working on this peer review, but it
Mhm,
may only go to one person who says yay or nay. And I
mhm,
think we're really missing that group culture in a sense.
mhm,
Again, I think the kind of the old men, white men society definitely doesn't need to return, but I think we can evolve it into a modern day or into the modern world and really work together to prove these things true or false, or if they're not. If they're in the middle, if they're a bit muddy, then send it out to more folks and try and make a better understanding of it. Really, I
mhm,
think I think there's this great book that I've been reading on and off called Rethink, and it's taking old ideas and yeah, they may have not been the best ideas back then, but it's rethinking about them and putting them to like a modern day culture, society, or way of doing things. And I
mhm,
think we can look at a lot of history. I know we try and move forward and evolve from history, but I think there's a lot we can learn not only from history, but there's a lot we can take from history and bring into the modern world and adapt it and make it better as well. And I think a group society where everyone has their own expertise and there's a variety of different fields and backgrounds and people trying to solve these problems as a group, as a team, is going to be a much better way than just giving it to one person to say yes or no. I think we need to de-evolve and re-evolve in a certain way in that
mhm.
sense.
At Nanu, on the Nanu app, there's a credibility system. There's a slider for rating a experience that someone shared on there. Can you tell me a little bit more about that credibility system and
Mm.
and what Nanu's trying to achieve with that?
Absolutely. So again, the citizen science angle is basically taking a level of community and give it as like a mini peer review. Everyone has their own little power of peer review, where they can read it, they can look at the evidence, and then they can rate it credible. Do they think it's 10% credible based on the evidence? Do they think it's 30% credible? Do they think it's 100% credible? Everyone's going to have their own biases. Everyone's going to have their own backgrounds and expertise. But again, it's about the community. It's about the group consensus. About you pass it for 1,000 people. Through that 1,000 people, you hope that there's going to be an average mean number, which will then allow for a level of credibility.
Mhm.
At the end of the day. And I think, by building these types of tools and trying to introduce new ideas, not every idea is going to be the best idea, and ideas will definitely evolve over time. I think the credibility bar that we use is going to definitely evolve over time. But I think it's a good start and it's doing something a bit different and trying to look at it from a different angle.
A lot of the questions that we're touching on today are really indicative of the course that Nanu is trying to take. And my question for you, now that we're established and we're building our user base and our archives and our discussion bases, et cetera, what's next? How do we expand this out to bring in more people and to get more people involved with the overall investigation of the unknown?
Yeah, I think like I've mentioned, it's all about working together. I think like the next big thing that we're working on is our community update. And the one reason we want to do that is we want to be able to support various levels of communities. We very much can support the individual at the moment, but it really is the group effort. The group effort is key in unlocking the mysteries of our universe. So we're bringing the community update out. We're working on that, and then we will hopefully after that build tools to allow communities to investigate, to add evidence, to work together, to collaborate. Because that really is the building blocks of investigating in collaboration and hopefully the citizen science movement that we kind of want to push, with these topics. We know an individual can only do so much. But if we can connect the whole world together and really work together in a lot of these experiences, a lot of these research, and a lot of these unknowns, hopefully we can make some of the unknowns known one day. And if it's not us on Nano, then if we've inspired someone to do it somewhere else, then that's kind of job done in my book. So yeah, our next real big push is the kind of communities and getting kind of everyone kind of together is kind of the focus.
Well, we may not have answered all of the questions that we set out to today or solved any of the major problems that we had hoped for. But I do look forward to continuing this conversation on Nanu with you and with others. Nick, thank you so much for the conversation today, and I look forward to more with you.
Thank you very much, Sean.